The first time Walter Quinn saw Yash Gorehorn, she was standing at the edge of Dustwell's only trading post with a broken wagon wheel at her feet and murder written plainly across her face, and every man in the square had taken 3 deliberate steps backward. He had not. That wasn't bravery, exactly. Walter Quinn was the kind of man who had spent so many years alone on the frontier that the social instincts other men relied on had been slowly replaced by something more practical. The simple habit of seeing what was actually in front of him rather than what fear told him was there. What was in front of him was a woman of considerable height, with the broad shoulders and greenish-gray complexion of an orc, tusks that curved upward in graceful arcs from her lower jaw, and dark amber eyes that were currently aimed at the shattered spokes of her wheel with an expression of absolute, restrained fury. Around her, roped to a post, stood a lean gray mule who looked as though he had witnessed better days. Lashed to the broken wagon was a collection of trapping supplies, wire snares, cured pelts rolled into bundles, iron leg traps, and a long rifle that had seen considerable use. She was a trapper, alone. And her wheel had given out in the worst possible place, which was to say, in a town that did not especially want her. Walter had a spare wheel. He had been carrying it in the back of his own wagon for 6 months, a habit born of the kind of paranoid practicality the frontier demanded. He had never needed it. He pulled his wagon around the side of the post, unhitched it from his horse, and walked across the dusty square with the wheel balanced against his shoulder, stepping over the gap she had created simply by being herself in a place that was unready for her. He stopped beside the broken wagon. He set the wheel down. He looked at the shattered one. "That hub's been cracking for a while," he said. "You can see it in the grain. Wasn't going to last another 20 miles no matter what you did." She turned those amber eyes on him. Up close, they were extraordinary, deep and fierce and measuring, the kind of eyes that had learned to calculate threat before anything else. "I know that," she said. Her voice was lower than he expected, with a roughness to it that was not unpleasant. She spoke the common tongue without an accent, which told him she had been living among or near human settlements for some time. "I am not asking for an explanation of what failed. I am standing here deciding what to do about it." "I have a spare wheel," Walter said. "It should fit. Your axle looks about the same width as mine." She looked at the wheel he had set down. She looked at him. There was something in that look that he would come to know well over the coming months, a kind of rapid, ruthless assessment that stripped away everything unnecessary and went straight to the question of what a thing cost. "What do you want for it?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. The word landed between them like a stone dropped in still water, and she watched the ripples of it with visible suspicion. "Men don't give things for nothing," she said. "I've been carrying that wheel for half a year," he said. "It'll be a relief to set it down. My name is Walter Quinn. I have a homestead about 14 miles north of here up toward the Grayback ridgeline." She was quiet for a moment. The mule shifted and stamped. "Yash Gorehorn," she said finally. Her chin lifted slightly as she said it, the way a person does when they have given their name enough times in hostile places that they have learned to offer it like a dare rather than an introduction. "I trap the Grayback territory, mostly the northeastern draws." "I know that territory," Walter said. "Good Martin runs up along the eastern slope. I've seen your snare lines." Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, but a slight recalibration, the way a compass needle swings when it finds true north. "You've been up in those draws?" she asked. "I cut timber up that way in autumn," he said. "I don't touch the snare lines. Never did see any point in it." Most human men who came across orc-set traps in what they considered their territory had a great deal of point in touching them, in removing them, in leaving the kind of deliberate destruction that communicated ownership without requiring the courage of direct confrontation. The fact that he hadn't done this and said so simply, without performing virtue about it, landed differently than any grand declaration would have. "Help me with the axle pin," she said, and that was the beginning of everything. They changed the wheel together in the dust of the square while the townspeople of Dustwell watched from a cautious distance. Walter handed her tools when she needed them and did not offer to do things she was already doing. She was stronger than him by a considerable margin. Orc physiology was simply built differently, with a density of muscle and bone that made most human men look as if they had been assembled from cheaper materials, and she used that strength with an efficient economy of motion that he found quietly remarkable. When the wheel was on and the pin secured, she stood and wiped her hands on a cloth from her belt. "You're not afraid of me," she said. It was not quite a question. "No," he said. "Most men are. Most men haven't spent much time actually looking at the things they're afraid of," he said. "Usually makes it worse. Sometimes it makes it stop." She studied him with that amber gaze for a long moment. He let her look. He had nothing to hide and no particular need to fill the silence with noise. "I'll remember the name," she said at last. "Walter Quinn, 14 miles north. If you're ever up that way and need something," he said, "the door's open." She untied the mule, climbed up onto the wagon bench with a single fluid motion, and clicked her tongue at the animal. The wagon rolled forward, and she did not look back, which was exactly what he expected. He watched her go until she turned north up the main road and disappeared between the tree line. The man who ran the trading post materialized at Walter's elbow with the particular energy of someone who had been waiting to speak their piece. "You know what she is," the man said. "A trapper with a broken wheel," Walter said pleasantly, and went inside to buy his supplies. The Grayback ridgeline was not a forgiving piece of country. It ran roughly northeast from the lowland settlements, rising through dense mixed forest of pine and birch and iron oak, before climbing into exposed granite shoulders that caught every weather system rolling in off the northern plains and translated it into something considerably more violent by the time it arrived. In winter, the ridge was brutal. In spring, the snowmelt turned the draws into rushing corridors of white water that had swept more than one unwary traveler off their feet and down into the rocks. In summer, the flies were legendary. In autumn, which was when Walter Quinn had come to love it most, the whole thing turned to copper and gold and the air went sharp as a new blade. And every morning you could see clear to the horizon and feel like the world made a kind of beautiful, terrible sense. Walter's homestead sat in a shallow bowl of land about halfway up the eastern slope, sheltered from the worst of the northern wind by a fold of rock that someone long before him had been smart enough to build against. He had a log cabin that he had spent 3 years making genuinely livable, with a proper stone chimney, double-shuttered windows, a root cellar dug 8 feet into the slope, and a barn that housed 2 horses, a small dairy cow, and more woodworking tools than any one man needed. He grew a kitchen garden in summer, cut timber for trade in autumn, ran a small line of rabbit snares through the winter months, and in the spring he tapped the birch trees along the lower slope and made a syrup that the trading post in Dustwell would buy from him. He was 31 years old, and he had been alone for 4 of them. Not unhappily alone. That was a distinction that mattered to him. He had come to this place by choice, after years of feeling like civilization was a coat that fit everyone else well, and had been made for a different body than his. He had tried towns. He had tried the work that towns offered. He had tried, briefly and without much success, a relationship with a woman in Calvert's Crossing who had wanted him to be a more social creature than he was, and they had parted without cruelty, but with the mutual recognition of fundamental incompatibility. The ridge had been his answer. He was not lonely. He was simply alone, which was a different thing entirely, and he had made his peace with it. That peace was not disturbed when Yash Gorehorn appeared on his land for the first time, about 3 weeks after the wheel incident in Dustwell, walking the upper tree line at a distance that said she was checking her snare lines and not particularly interested in him. He saw her from the eastern corner of the barn where he was replacing a rotten board, and he raised a hand in acknowledgement, and she returned it with a brief nod, and they left it at that. She came through again 4 days later, And this time she was close enough to the cabin that he could see. She had a good take, 4 martens and 2 foxes hanging from her belt. He had a pot of something on the fire because he always had a pot of something on the fire, and he called out from the cabin door, "There's stew if you want it." She stopped walking. She looked at the cabin. She looked at him. "I've eaten," she said. "Coffee, then," he said. "It's cold today." It was cold. The autumn was tipping toward winter with increasing commitment, and the high draws were getting frost on the ground by mid-morning. She stood there in the cold with her kills and her long rifle and that calculating amber gaze, and he waited. "Coffee," she said, and came over. She did not come inside, which he understood. She sat on the bench outside the cabin door, which he had built specifically for sitting outside and watching the valley below, and he brought her coffee in the largest mug he owned because her hands were large and elegant in the way that strong hands often are, and she drank it without speaking for a while and watched the valley. "You have a good view up here," she said. "Best part of the place," he agreed. He sat at the other end of the bench and drank his own coffee and watched the valley with her. "The eastern draw is going to be good this winter," she said. "Martin sign is heavy, better than last year." "I noticed the tracks," he said. "Lot of rabbit too, that'll keep them fat." This was the pattern they fell into, those first weeks. She came through on her trap runs, which looped in a wide arc through the northeastern section of the Grayback territory, and sometimes she stopped and sometimes she didn't, and when she stopped, it was for coffee and then later sometimes for a meal, and they talked about the land and the animals and the weather in the way that people do who understand that these are not small topics, but in fact, the largest and most consequential topics available to them. He learned things about her gradually, the way you learn things about the terrain, by paying attention over time rather than demanding a map. He learned that she had been raised in a mixed settlement called Ironville, about 40 miles east, where orcs and humans had coexisted in a state of practical cooperation, if not exactly warmth. He learned that her father had been the best trapper in that settlement, and had taught her everything she knew, and that he had died 3 winters ago of a chest fever that came on fast and took him before spring. He learned that she had a younger sister, still in Ironville, who had married a human man and was apparently doing well enough, though Yash spoke about this fact with a careful neutrality that made him think the situation was more complicated than it appeared. She learned things about him too, though he was a more naturally forthcoming subject. He told her about Calvert's Crossing, about the timber work, about the 3 years of building the cabin. He told her about his parents, who had been good people and were both gone now, his mother first and then his father 2 years later, as though one had simply been waiting for the other before agreeing to leave. He told her about the season he had spent in the lowland militia, which had been the experience that had most thoroughly convinced him that organized human society was not his natural element. "They made you a soldier," she said, the night she came in out of a sleet storm and sat at his table for the first time, because the sleet was genuinely dangerous and staying outside would have been stupid. "They made me a man who carried a rifle in a line with other men," he said. "There's a difference. I was never any good at the part where you had to care about the same things the man next to you cared about." "What things did you care about?" she asked. He thought about it. "Whether people were actually being helped by what we were doing," he said. "Mostly they weren't." She looked at him steadily. Firelight was amber on her face, picking out the strong lines of her cheekbones and the slight gleam of her tusks, and he noticed for the first time, though it was not the last, that she was beautiful in a way that the world around her seemed determined not to acknowledge. "The militia in Ironville used to run orcs out of the eastern quarter every spring," she said, "claimed it was for market safety." "That's not what it was for," he said. "No," she agreed. "It wasn't." The sleet rattled against the shutters. The fire popped. "I don't run anyone off my land," he said, in case that needed saying. "I had gathered that," she said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite gratitude, because gratitude implies a debt, and she was not a woman who dealt in debts, but it was something adjacent to it, something that recognized what he had offered and chose to receive it. Winter came on fully in the way it always did in the Grayback country, which was to say suddenly and without apology. The first real snowfall came in the last week of autumn and laid down 2 feet in 24 hours, and the temperature dropped to the kind of cold that made iron tools seize and water freeze in buckets left indoors. Walter had been through enough of these winters that he was prepared, wood stacked high in the lean-to, root cellar packed with provisions, livestock fed and settled. He did not worry about himself. He worried in a mild and unspoken way about Yash, who he knew was running her trap line out of a winter camp she had set up in the eastern draw about 6 miles from his cabin. He had never seen the camp, but he knew it was there, had found the signs of it, the cleared ground, the fire ring, the carefully constructed meat cache in the branches above the camp perimeter. It was a competent camp, built by someone who knew winter camping. But it was still a camp, and 2 feet of snow in 24 hours was a significant event even for the competent. He did not go looking for her. She would not have wanted that, and beyond not wanting it, she would have found it condescending, and she would have been right. He went about his own work and waited. She came in on the 4th day of the hard cold, when the temperature had climbed back up enough to make travel reasonable. She came on foot, which told him the snow had been too deep and uneven for the wagon, and she had a pack on her back and the long rifle in her hand, and the expression of a person who has been having a very trying few days and is refusing to give them the satisfaction of showing it. "Your camp all right?" he asked, from the barn where he was feeding the horses. "Camp's fine," she said. "Lost 2 snares to the snow weight, and the creek at the lower draw has frozen over in a bad spot. Had to reroute the eastern line. That'll add 2 miles to the run," he said. "3, she said grimly. "The alternate path goes around the north side of the granite shoulder." He considered this. "That's a hard walk in this cold." "Yes," she said. "You could run your line out of here," he said. "Until the creek clears, it's closer to the eastern draw than your camp, and I've got the barn." She stopped walking. She looked at him. "I don't need your charity," she said. The words were not sharp exactly, but they had edges, and she put them out there with the care of a person who has needed to say this particular thing many times in many places. "It's not charity," he said. "I'm not offering you anything free. I'm offering you a logistical advantage that happens to benefit us both, since I've been thinking for 2 years that I need someone to look at the upper timber stand and tell me if there's marten habitat worth leaving for the long-term health of the trapping territory, and you know that country better than anyone." She was quiet for a long moment. "You want a land assessment," she said. "I want not to clear timber in a way that destroys something I'd rather not destroy," he said. "And you want a shorter walk in the cold. Seems like a reasonable arrangement." The thing about Yash Gorehorn was that she understood reasonable arrangements. She had survived on them, the practical exchange of value for value, stripped of sentiment and obligation, which was the only kind of transaction she had learned to fully trust. Sentiment came with strings. Obligation came with the right to collect. An arrangement came with a clear ledger. She stayed. Not in the cabin, not at first. She rolled her blankets out in the barn, in the loft above the horses, and he left that arrangement entirely to her without comment. He did not suggest she move inside. He did not imply that sleeping in a barn was inadequate. He went about his business and left the logistics of where she slept entirely in her hands, because they were entirely her hands to manage. 3 nights later, a temperature drop came that was so severe that even the horses were restless in their stalls, and he woke in the dark to the sound of the cabin door opening, and did not move or speak as she came in and rolled her blankets out in front of the fire. And in the morning she was gone before he woke, and neither of them mentioned it. Winter had its own rhythm, and they fell into it together without quite deciding to. She ran the trap lines. He cut and split wood, tended the livestock, worked on small repairs the cabin needed, and occasionally went down to Dustwell for supplies. When she came back in the evenings, he had food ready, because he cooked enough for 2 as a matter of habit now, and she ate without making it a bigger thing than it was. They talked. Sometimes they played a card game that she had learned somewhere and taught him, a complicated orc game that involved a great deal of strategic deception, and which she won consistently, until he figured out that she kept count of played cards and adjusted his play accordingly. And the night he actually beat her was the first time he heard her laugh. It was a remarkable sound, low and genuine and surprised out of her, like something she hadn't quite intended to release. She looked at the cards and she looked at him and she laughed, and it rearranged something in his chest that had been in the same position for a long time. "You've been watching how I play," she said. "I've been watching everything about you," he said. And then there was a silence that stretched a half-second longer than casual conversation usually allowed, and he became aware that he had said something true and slightly more than he had meant to say, and she became aware of it at the same time. She picked up the cards and shuffled them with great deliberate care. "Deal again," she said. He dealt again, and neither of them said anything about the moment, but it was there between them the way winter is there, not gone, just waiting. He had learned by midwinter that she had a scar along her left forearm from a steel trap that had misfired when she was 17, learning the trade from her father. He had learned that she could name every tree on the Grayback Ridge by the sound the wind made in it at different speeds. He had learned that she did not sleep well. He could hear her in the night sometimes, moving, restless, and once he had heard what he recognized as the sounds of a nightmare, quiet and controlled even in sleep, the way a person who has learned never to show distress handles it even in their unconscious hours. He had not gone to her. He had lain in his bunk and been aware of her and waited, and in the morning she had been exactly as she always was, so he had been exactly as he always was, and that had been the right call. He had learned that she was 28 years old, which he found himself calculating against his own 31, with a degree of attention that he acknowledged privately was not purely neutral. He had learned that she had never been in what she called a lasting arrangement with anyone, delivered as a piece of information with no more weight than she might give the price of Martin fur in Dustwell, which told him it carried considerably more weight than she was giving it. What she learned about him during those months was the thing he thought about later, the way she built her understanding of him not from what he told her, but from what she observed. She watched the way he treated his animals, which was with a matter-of-fact gentleness that neither performed sentiment nor ignored need. She watched the way he behaved in Dustwell on the 3 occasions she came with him, which was with a steady courtesy toward everyone that did not change when people were difficult about her presence beside him. And some people were, in the muttering, sideways, cowardly way of people who want to communicate hostility without taking responsibility for it. She watched how he simply did not engage with those people on their own terms, did not explain himself or apologize for her, just moved through the world with her at his side, and made it clear by manner alone that this was the arrangement and he was entirely at peace with it. The incident with the blacksmith happened in early winter, when they had gone down to Dustwell together for iron stock that she needed to repair her traps. The blacksmith had looked at her, then at Walter, then back at her with an expression that condensed a great deal of ugliness into a small space. "I don't do work for Orc custom," the blacksmith said. He said it to Walter, as though Yash were not present and capable of hearing. Walter set down the money he had been about to put on the counter and picked it back up. "Then I don't do business with you," he said, with the same tone he might use to observe that the weather had changed. He turned to leave. "Now hold on," the blacksmith started, because Walter Quinn was a regular customer and his money was good money. "I don't hold on for men who don't have the basic courtesy to speak to the person in front of them," Walter said, and walked out. Yash was already outside, standing in the cold with an expression that was controlled and unreadable, and he came to stand beside her. "There's a forge at Millhaven," he said, 12 miles east. The woman who runs it has no such policies." "I know the forge at Millhaven," she said. They walked to the wagon in silence. He handed her up not because she needed it, but because it was what he did, and she let him, which was a thing she had started doing some weeks ago, the small acceptance of small gestures, which meant something to him even though he was careful not to make it mean something out loud. "You didn't have to do that," she said when they were on the road. "Yes, I did," he said. "A man who lets that kind of thing happen without saying anything is a man who thinks it's acceptable. It isn't acceptable." She looked at the road ahead. The horses moved steadily through the snow. "Thank you," she said quietly, the way a person says a thing they have not said much. "You don't need to thank me for basic decency," he said. "Maybe not," she said, "but I will anyway." The forge at Millhaven was run by a broad, competent woman named Sierra, who had been doing business with Yash for 2 years, and shook her hand without ceremony and got on with the work. And Walter bought the iron stock and paid for the forging, and they ate lunch at the small inn attached to the Millhaven trading post. And it was, all told, an unexpectedly good day. February was the deepest and harshest month, the kind of cold that made the trees crack in the night like rifle shots, and the snow pack on the ridge face dangerous with the weight of it. Walter's cabin was warm and solid, and they had enough wood and enough food, and the days had a quality to them that he did not have language for yet, but that he was beginning to recognize as happiness. Not the absence of hardship, because hardship was constant: the cold, the work, the isolation, the weight of the world being what it was toward people like her, and toward the life they were building here. But happiness within that, the specific and particular joy of waking in a place that was entirely your own, with the smell of coffee and wood smoke, and knowing that the person across the fire from you was exactly the person you wanted to be across the fire from you. He had not said any of this. He did not know yet if he should. The moment that broke something open between them happened in the 3rd week of February, on a night when the wind came screaming down off the northern ridge, and the temperature plunged so fast you could watch your breath freeze before it dispersed. He had been at the workbench in the corner of the cabin, smoothing a new axe handle, and she had been mending a tear in one of her heavy canvas trap bags by the fire, and she had fallen asleep doing it. He looked up from his work, and she was asleep, her head tilted back against the high back of the fireside chair, her hands still loosely holding the bag and the needle. The firelight was on her face, and he sat with the word for a moment, because words mattered and he wanted the right one. She was peaceful, an expression he had never seen on her waking face, because her waking face was always engaged, always calculating, always carrying the particular alertness of a person who had learned that the world requires constant vigilance. In sleep, that guard was simply gone, and underneath it was a face of extraordinary beauty, and he saw clearly and completely in that moment that he was in love with her and had been for some time. He set down the axe handle. He got up very quietly and got the heaviest blanket from his bunk and draped it over her without waking her, and then he went back to his bench and sat there with the axe handle in his hands and the full weight of what he was feeling, and did not do anything with it, because there was no call to do anything with it tonight. In the morning, she woke before him, as she usually did, and she folded the blanket and left it on the chair and made coffee, and did not say anything about the night. But as she handed him his cup, she did not immediately let go of it, and for a half-second their hands were both on the same mug, and she looked at him with those amber eyes in the gray morning light, and whatever she saw, she seemed to file it away somewhere important. Spring came the way it always does in the Grayback country, not gently but with enormous conviction, the snowpack releasing all at once into torrents of meltwater, the birch trees budding overnight, the air going from knife cold to merely sharp in the space of a week. Yash moved back to her draw camp with the arrival of good weather, as the logistics demanded. The trap lines needed to shift to spring patterns, which took her farther east than Walter's cabin was useful for. She said this plainly and practically, which was how she said all things, and Walter said that made sense, which it did. But she came back. Not every day, but with a regularity that was more than coincidence, twice a week, sometimes 3 times, working out of his barn when the eastern runs brought her close enough, staying for a meal, staying to play cards, staying to sit on the bench outside the cabin and watch the valley come back to life below them. He had started tapping the birch trees, and she helped him on 2 of the afternoons she was there, carrying sap buckets with the ease of someone for whom 2 full buckets in each hand were simply not a matter of much consequence. And they boiled the sap down in the big iron pot in the yard, and the whole slope smelled of sweetness for 3 days. It was during the syrup making that she said it, the thing he would turn over in his mind for the rest of his life. She was standing over the pot with a long wooden paddle, stirring slowly, watching the surface of the syrup for the signs of reduction, and he was adding wood to the fire beneath it, and he had said something. He could not afterward remember exactly what, something ordinary, something about the yield being good this year, and she had stopped stirring and looked at him with an expression that was more open than her usual expressions, the way the spring weather opens what the winter held closed. "I want to tell you something," she said. He waited. He was good at waiting. "I don't know how to do what you seem to want," she said, "whatever this is. I have never let anything go this far before, and not because I have not wanted to, but because wanting something and knowing how to have it are not the same thing." She paused, stirring again. "I am not built for softness. I don't know how to be gentle with myself or with any of this. I break things when I get close to them. I always have." He sat with that for a moment. The sap pot bubbled gently. Somewhere on the slope below, a woodpecker was working at a dead birch. "I'm not asking you for softness," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to be different than you are," he said. "I'm not asking you to be careful or quiet or to handle things gently. I know who you are. I've spent a whole winter knowing who you are, and I'm not asking you to be anyone else." He looked at the fire. "I should tell you something too. I'm not built for giving up on things that matter to me. It's my worst quality, some would say, and my best, depending on the day. So if you're worried that whatever this is will become more than you want and then I'll just fold and let it go, that's not how I work. You'd have to actually send me away." She was quiet for a long time, stirring the pot. "You understand what it costs," she said finally. "What it costs to be what I am in a world like this one. What it would cost you, being with someone like me." "I've thought about that," he said. "I'm not confused about it. And I'd rather have the cost than not have what it buys," he said. The syrup bubbled. The woodpecker knocked. She stirred. "You are the most unexpectedly stubborn man I have ever met," she said at last. "I know," he said, and she looked at him, and something in her face moved, and she laughed, that same low, surprised laugh that had rearranged him the first time he heard it. And then she turned back to the pot, but she was still smiling, and he let himself smile at the fire and at the slope and at the whole improbable spring. She kissed him first. He had expected this if it happened, which he had thought it might, not out of any masculine assumption, but because he had understood for some time that she would need to be the one to cross that distance, that it had to come from her, or it would not mean what it needed to mean. It happened on an evening in late spring when the light was long and gold, and the valley below was green in a way that felt almost excessive, as though the world was overdoing it out of sheer relief at winter's end. They were sitting on the bench, shoulders nearly touching in the comfortable way they had developed, and she turned and looked at him with that amber gaze that had started as measurement and had become something considerably more complex, and she leaned forward and kissed him. It was not a tentative kiss. She was not a tentative person. It was honest and warm and full of everything they had spent a winter building between them, and when she pulled back, she looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before, something open, something at the very edge of vulnerable, like a door held just barely ajar. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," he agreed, which was not a romantic statement on the face of it, but which carried, in context, more than enough. Summer on the Grayback Ridge was the season Walter had always loved best, and this summer it was better than it had ever been. Yash came and went according to the demands of her work, which he respected absolutely. Her livelihood was her independence, and he would never have asked her to compromise either one for the sake of mere proximity. But she came back consistently, and when she came back fully with the whole of herself, and he received her the same way. She was not easy to love. He had understood that from the beginning, and he found he didn't mind it the way he thought he might. She was complicated and private, and she carried old hurts with the particular silence of a person who has decided that pain is information, not performance, and she processed most things alone before she brought them to him, which meant that by the time she spoke about something it was already half resolved, and what she needed from him was not answers but witness. He learned to be a good witness. He had opinions and he shared them, because she didn't want someone who effaced himself entirely. She wanted someone real to reckon with. But he learned the difference between being present and being overbearing, and he kept himself on the right side of that line. She, in turn, was extraordinarily good to him in ways that she probably didn't recognize as care because she did them so practically. She had come back from the eastern country in midsummer with a piece of knowledge about the timber stand that saved him from clearing a section he had been planning to take a wolf den, old and established, in the heart of the best stand, that would have created a conflict with her trapping territory if he'd gone in there. She had not framed this as a favor. She had framed it as logistical information, which it also was. He had thanked her and replanned his autumn cut and thought, as he often did when she did things like this, that she was one of the most fundamentally generous people he had ever known, and that she had entirely failed to notice this about herself. The first time he told her she was beautiful, they were in the barn in late summer and she was helping him work harness leather, the two of them pulling the long strips through their hands to soften it, and the light was coming sideways through the barn boards and it was on her face and on her hands, and he simply said it as it occurred to him without preamble. "You are genuinely beautiful," he said. "I want you to know I think that in case you don't." She stopped pulling leather. She looked at him. "You are strange," she said. "Probably," he said, and went on working the leather. She was quiet for a moment, and then she went on working the leather too. And later that night when they were sitting by the fire she reached over without looking at him and put her hand on top of his, and left it there, and he turned his hand over so their palms met, and that was its own kind of conversation. There was a morning in August when 3 men from the lower settlements came up the slope on horseback. They came with the kind of purposeful slowness that meant they had thought about what they were going to do and had decided to do it, and they stopped in the yard in front of the cabin and called out in the way that men do when they want you to come out to them rather than them coming to you. Walter came out. Yash was behind him in the doorway. "Quinn," the man in front said. He was broad and weathered, with a civic quality to him that meant he was the kind of man who considered himself a representative of something. "There's been talk in Dustwell about the orc woman." "Has there?" Walter said. "People are concerned," the man said. "About her running trap lines so close to the settlement territory. About her being about the situation up here." "The situation up here," Walter said, "is my business and hers. The trap lines she runs are within her established territory, which she has worked for years without incident. If anyone in Dustwell has a specific legal complaint, I'd be happy to hear it. Otherwise, I'd say you've had a long ride for no particular reason." The man's jaw tightened. His 2 companions said nothing, which was the kind of support that costs nothing and provides less. "Quinn," the man said more quietly, "you're a well-regarded man in this territory. Don't make it complicated for yourself." "My life is not complicated," Walter said. "It is, in fact, the least complicated it has ever been. Good morning." He did not go back inside until the 3 men had turned their horses and ridden back down the slope. When he came back through the door, Yash was at the hearth with her back to him, and she did not turn around. "They'll keep coming," she said. "Probably," he said. "Let them." She turned now and looked at him. "You might lose things over this," she said. "Trade connections, goodwill. People who would otherwise deal with you." "The people I'd lose goodwill with," he said, "are not people whose goodwill I particularly want." She looked at him steadily. He could see her deciding something, working through something, the way she always worked through things methodically, honestly, without flinching from the full weight of it. I told myself I wasn't going to do this, she said. Get attached to something in a place. Get into a situation that made me matter to someone in a way that could be used against them. You don't get to decide that for me, he said, not unkindly. I know, she said. That's the part I'm still getting used to. He crossed the cabin and stood in front of her, and she looked up at him. She was only a few inches shorter than him, which meant this was not a great adjustment, and he took her face in both hands with a gentleness that he could see moved her precisely because it was not a performance but simply what he felt. Yash, he said, I have never in my life been more certain of anything than I am of this. Of you. Of whatever we're building here. I'm not asking you to give up who you are or how you move through the world. I'm just asking you to let me be in that world with you. Her hands came up and covered his. I don't know how to deserve you, she said, very quietly. You're not a debt, he said. You're a person. You don't deserve me or not deserve me. You just are, and I love that you are. She held very still, the way she did when something had hit her center and she was deciding how to carry it. I love you, she said. The words came out with the careful deliberateness of someone who has assembled them one at a time, because they matter so much they cannot be rushed. I want you to know that. I should have said it before and I didn't because I am not good at saying things like that. But I do, I love you. He kissed her forehead, her cheek, the line of her jaw, and she closed her eyes and leaned into it. And outside the August morning was blazing, and somewhere on the ridge a hawk was calling, and everything was entirely, imperfectly, wonderfully right. Autumn arrived and Walter made a decision that had been forming in the back of his mind since spring, and which now felt fully developed and ready. He rode down to Dustwell and spent a morning with the land clerk, and he came back with a document that he spread on the table in front of Yash that evening. What is this? She said, reading it. I had the trapped territory east of my timber stand formally registered to your name, he said. The northeastern draws the entire eastern ridge face to the granite shoulder. It should have been documented years ago. You've worked it for 5 years. Now it's on record. She read it. She read it again. This is a legal claim, she said. Yes, he said. They'll contest it, she said. They can try, he said. The land clerk is a fair woman and she agreed the territory had been worked and established. It's documented now. Harder to contest than an undocumented claim. She was quiet for a long time, her hands flat on the document. You did this without asking me, she said. He held her gaze. Is that wrong? She considered it. No, she said finally. It's not wrong. She stopped. No one has ever done something like this for me, something that put weight behind it, not just words. You've worked that land for 5 years, he said. You know it better than anyone. You've managed it well. That should be recognized. She folded the document with great care and put it inside her pack, where she kept the things that mattered most. That winter was different from the one before. She moved her camp to the cabin without the winter camp interlude, a practical decision, because she had established by now that the eastern trap lines could be run out of the cabin with manageable travel times, and a personal decision, because she had also established by now that she did not want to be 6 miles from Walter Quinn in the deep cold if she didn't have to be. They found, over the cold months, that they lived together with a compatibility that surprised neither of them exactly but still felt remarkable. She was orderly. So was he, in his own way, not in the sense of neatness, because neither of them was particularly committed to surfaces, but in the sense of systems, the logical organization of space and time that allowed 2 people to inhabit a small cabin without friction. She had her routines, and he had his, and they meshed without requiring negotiation, which he suspected had something to do with the fact that they had both spent enough years alone, that they had made deliberate choices about how to live, rather than sliding into habits by default. She had nightmares twice that winter, bad ones, and both times he was there, not making a production of it, not pressing her to explain or describe, just a hand on her shoulder and his steady voice saying her name until she came back to herself, and then just lying beside her in the dark and being present until she slept again. She did not thank him. She did not need to. In the morning, she made breakfast and handed him coffee and looked at him with something in her eyes that communicated everything she couldn't say, and he received it the same way he received everything from her, which was with his full attention and his whole heart. In the deep middle of that second winter, on a night when the snow was falling steady and soft and the cabin was warm and the cards were dealt between them on the table, she looked up from her hand and said, without quite looking at him, "I want to stay." He looked at her. "Not just for the winter," she said. "I mean here, permanently, if that's what you want." He put down his cards. "That is very much what I want," he said. She looked at her cards. He could see the complicated thing moving through her, the thing that was not doubt exactly but was the awareness of what permanence meant, what it required, what it cost and gave in equal measure. He waited. "I've never stayed anywhere permanently," she said. "I know," he said. "I don't know if I'm good at it." "Neither do I," he said. "We'll find out together." She looked up at him then. "That doesn't worry you." "Everything about this worries me," he said. "But worry and love are not mutually exclusive, it turns out." She set down her own cards. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Okay," she said, for the second time in their history, and it meant the same thing it had meant the first time, which was that she had decided. And when she decided, she was fully decided, no reservation held back. Spring came, and with it the particular industry of a shared life settling into itself. She built a proper storage structure for her trapping supplies in the corner of the barn, not using his tools and space but planning and constructing it herself, which he helped with because he was asked, using her design. It was a good structure, better organized than his side of the barn, and he told her so, and she accepted this without false modesty because false modesty was not in her nature. They went to Dustwell together regularly, and the town adjusted itself around them with the gradual, reluctant accommodation of a place that has decided the effort of resistance is more trouble than it's worth. Not warmth, not yet, not from everyone. There was still the undertow of prejudice that never quite went away, but a functional coexistence that left them room to do business and live their lives. Sierra at the Millhaven Forge became something like a friend, in the quiet, practical way of frontier friendships. An older trapper named Josiah, who worked the territory south of the ridge, made a point of stopping at the cabin when his runs brought him close and sharing a meal, and he addressed Yash with the direct, weather-beaten courtesy of a man who had been in the territory long enough to care more about competence than about convention. It was Josiah who told them, on a visit in early summer, that there had been talk in the lower settlements of formalizing the boundary agreements between the established trapping territories, a council of sorts, informal, but intended to prevent the encroachments and disputes that had been increasing as more settlers arrived from the south. "They'll want representation from the northeastern territory," Josiah said, drinking Walter's coffee on the bench outside the cabin. "That's your territory now, Gorehorn." "Legally," Yash said. "Also practically," Josiah said. "You've managed those draws better than anyone I've seen in 20 years in this country. The wolf population is stable. The marten are recovering. You've left the breeding habitat alone and taken from the surplus. That's good management, and the council would do well to hear from someone who actually knows what they're doing." She was quiet for a moment. "A human council?" "Mostly," Josiah said. "Grist from Ironville might come. He's orc, good man." Yash glanced at Walter. "I'll go with you," he said, "if you want, or not if you don't." "I want," she said. The Territorial Council met in Millhaven at the end of summer. 6 people gathered around a table at the inn, and Yash sat at that table and spoke about the Eastern Territory with the authority of someone who has earned their knowledge the hard way and knows it. Walter sat beside her. She did not need him to speak for her, and he did not speak for her. He was there as her person, which was its own kind of statement about what the arrangement was. The man named Grist was there, a broad, older orc with the careful stillness of a diplomat, and he looked at Yash with recognition and at Walter with assessment and apparently found both satisfactory, because he addressed them both equally throughout the meeting. The boundary agreements they produced that day were not perfect. Nothing agreed upon by 6 people with competing interests ever is, but they were fair, and they were written, and Yash's territory was recognized within them, which was more than she had started the day with. On the road back to the ridge in the wagon, she was quiet for a while, watching the country go by. "Grist is going to come up to look at the eastern draw in the autumn," she said finally. "I told him the marten habitat situation and he wants to see the breeding grounds. He has a similar situation in the Ironville territory and is trying to establish some protections." "That's good work," Walter said. "It might become something," she said. "A formal arrangement, cross-territory habitat agreements, something with teeth." She glanced at him. "It would mean more trips, more time in other places." "Good," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You've been running this territory alone for 5 years," he said. "If you can build something that reaches further, something that protects more country and brings in other people who know what they're doing, that's worth the travel." She looked at him for a long moment. "You'd be here alone." "I've been alone before," he said. "I'd rather have you gone for a week doing something important than have you here all the time doing something smaller than you're capable of." She turned back to the road. But she reached over and took his hand, and she held it the whole way back up the ridge, which was 15 miles and took the better part of the afternoon, and he drove the horses one-handed and was entirely content to do so. There was a proposal, eventually. He had been thinking about it for some time, not with anxiety but with the patient accumulation of readiness, the way a timber cutter waits for the right moment in the fall of a tree, not forcing it, not hurrying it, but knowing the moment when it comes. It came on an evening in late autumn, in the 2nd year of their living together, when the harvest was done and the wood was stacked, and the evening had that particular quality of completion and abundance that good seasons sometimes end with. They were sitting on the bench with the last of the evening light on the valley, and he turned to her, and she looked at him with the amber eyes that had measured him on a dusty square in Dustwell 3 years ago and had found him worthy, and he said, "Marry me." Not a question exactly, more of an offering. He had a ring, a simple one, iron-worked at the Millhaven forge with a design Sierra had pressed on him when he'd explained what it was for. 2 lines twisted together that could be read as either human or orc knotwork depending on how you looked at it, which was intentional. She took the ring and looked at it for a long time. "This is not a practical arrangement," she said. "No," he agreed. "The town will talk. The town talks about us already. My sister will probably cry," she said, and there was something almost tentatively amused in it. "I expect so," he said. "Good tears or bad, probably both," Yash said. "She is a complicated person." She turned the ring over in her fingers once more. "Yes," she said, "I will." He slid the ring onto her finger and she looked at her own hand with an expression that he had never seen on her before and could not name, something naked and wondering, like someone who has spent years drawing maps of a country they never expected to enter and has suddenly, improbably arrived. She looked up at him. "I love you," she said without the careful assembly this time, quickly, warmly, naturally, as if the words had finally learned the way out. "I love you," he said back. The wedding was small because neither of them wanted a performance. Josiah came, standing straight and dignified in his best coat. Sierra came from Millhaven. Grist came from Ironville, and with him came Yash's sister, whose name was Tem and who was a slight, quick-eyed orc woman who looked at Walter with intense suspicion for approximately 45 minutes, and then, apparently deciding something in his favor, attached herself to his side for the rest of the day, and told him things about Yash's childhood that made him laugh and made Yash threaten her with grievous consequences. The land clerk from Dustwell performed the ceremony, because she was the only official within 20 miles and had told Walter privately that she thought the whole situation was a fine thing, and she was glad to be part of it. They stood on the bench outside the cabin, not a symbolic gesture, Exactly, though it was that too, it was simply the place where they had built most of what they had together and said the words. He promised to be beside her. She promised to stay. These were the things they meant. The years that came after the wedding had the texture of a life genuinely lived, full of the ordinary, and the extraordinary in the proportions that a real life contains, which is mostly the ordinary, threaded with moments of the extraordinary that keep the whole thing luminous. They had a son in the 3rd year after the wedding, a child who arrived in the world with his father's dark hair and his mother's amber eyes, and a set of small, perfect proto-tusks that Walter stared at for a long time in the first hour, and then looked up at Yash with an expression of such open, delighted wonder that she laughed, even exhausted as she was. "You expected him to look fully human," she said. "I expected him to look like a miracle," Walter said, "and he does. His name is Dar." Dar Quinn grew up on the Grayback Ridge, knowing every tree and every animal and every rock on the slope, and knowing that his family was not like all the families in Dustwell, and knowing that this was not a problem but a fact, one of many facts about the world that he absorbed with the equanimity of a child who has been consistently shown that the world is larger and stranger and better than its narrowest versions would suggest. 2 years after Dar, they had a daughter, a fierce small creature with her mother's build and her father's stubborn patience in strange combination, and they named her Isla, and she could climb the fence rails of the barn before she could properly walk, and gave both of them periodic heart failures throughout her childhood. Grist's cross-territory habitat agreements became a formal arrangement. The Grayback Land Council, which met quarterly and of which Yash became a founding member, and in the 6th year of its existence, the chair. This meant more travel, more time in Millhaven and Ironville, and occasionally in towns further south, and Walter managed the homestead during those absences with the competent calm of a man who has always known how to be alone when he needs to be, and who no longer needs to be alone very often. Tem visited every summer, and in the 4th year she brought her own daughter, a child the same age as Dar, and the two of them terrorized the ridge in ways that kept both families entertained and occasionally alarmed. Josiah retired his trap lines eventually, passing his territory registration to a young man from the South Settlements whom Yash had mentored through the council, and he took to sitting on whatever bench was available and offering opinions on things, which everyone found more agreeable than not. There was an evening in the 7th year of their marriage when they were both sitting on the bench outside the cabin. They had extended the bench by this point, as it had to accommodate a broader household, and Dar was down in the yard throwing sticks for the dog they had acquired in the 5th year, and Isla was perched on the fence rail watching the valley with her mother's focused attention, and the light was the particular gold of autumn on the ridge, and Walter looked at all of it. He looked at the cabin he had spent 3 years making livable, and that had become, in the years since, genuinely beautiful in the way that lived-in things become beautiful, full of use and memory, and the evidence of occupation. He looked at the barn with Yash's storage structure in the corner, perfectly organized. He looked at the kitchen garden, which had expanded considerably from his original modest plot, because Yash had turned out to have a serious opinion about growing things, something she had discovered about herself with evident surprise. He looked at Dar throwing sticks, and Isla watching the valley, and Yash beside him with the autumn light in her amber eyes. "Hey," he said. She looked at him. "Are you happy?" he asked. She considered this. She had always been willing to consider things honestly, which was one of the things he loved most about her. "Yes," she said, "I am happy, genuinely and specifically happy, which is something I did not expect to be able to say when I was standing over a broken wagon wheel in Dustwell 8 years ago. I was happy when I saw you," he said. "I didn't know it yet, but I was." She looked at him sideways. "You were happy watching a woman with a broken wheel and murder in her eyes. I was happy watching someone real," he said. "You were the most real person I had seen in years." She reached over and took his hand, as she had on the road back from Millhaven all those years ago, and held it with the same steady warmth. You told me you weren't built for giving up, she said. I told you that was fine, he said, because I wasn't built for giving up. I remember, she said. I remember exactly. Down in the yard, Dar threw the stick too far and the dog went crashing through the garden fence. And there was a shout and then laughter. And Isla leaned sideways on her fence rail to see what had happened, nearly losing her balance. Walter was on his feet fast, but Isla righted herself and looked at her parents with her mother's amber eyes and her father's expression of complete unruffled self-assurance, as if she had intended every moment of it. She'll be fine, Yash said, watching their daughter with the particular pride of a parent who recognizes their own nature in a child. She'll be extraordinary, Walter said. Both of them will. He sat back down. Yash leaned against him, her shoulder into his, the easy, comfortable weight of two people who have spent years learning the specific gravity of each other. I told you I wasn't built for softness, she said quietly. I know, he said. I am still not particularly, she said. I don't think that has changed. No, he agreed. But you're built for this, for all of this. He looked at the yard, the cabin, the ridge, the valley beyond. You built most of it. She was quiet for a moment, then, we built it. Yes, he said, we did. The autumn wind came down off the ridge, cold and clean, carrying the smell of pine and distance. Dar was repairing the garden fence with the serious concentration of a 7-year-old who has decided this is his responsibility. Isla had climbed down from the fence rail and was now engaged in some negotiation with the dog that seemed to involve a great deal of mutual dignity. The valley below was copper and gold, and the light was fading the way it does in autumn, slowly and beautifully, as if it too was reluctant to leave. Walter Quinn sat on the bench he had built and put his arm around Yash Gorehorn, and she settled into the curve of it without performance, without ceremony, without anything that was not simply the truth of two people who had chosen each other with full knowledge of the cost and the gift of it, and who had found across the years that the choosing had been exactly right. He had not been built for giving up. She had not been built for softness. What they had built together was something that required neither only the willingness to stay, to look clearly at the truth of things, to offer what you had and receive what was offered, to keep showing up in the cold and the dark and the mud and the impractical, improbable, extraordinary business of loving another person through everything that a life contains. The ridge held them. The valley spread below them. The evening came on, amber and slow, and they watched it together from the bench where it had all in its own way begun. And there they were, home.